So when I meet people and I talk about fermenting and I teach classes in fermenting, the biggest question I get is, how do I know if this is safe? I meet so many people who've bought all the stuff. They've got their jars, they've got their things. Some of them have even made the ferment, but they don't dare eat it because everyone is scared that they're going to poison their family. So let me reassure you and tell you how to know that this is safe to eat. Fermenting is a really natural process. And the good news for that is that if something goes wrong, it is obvious. Nature's really trying to help you. So if something goes wrong, it's either going to look wrong, smell wrong, or taste wrong. Like, it's really going to be obvious. So some things that can happen, like I have made salsa in the past and I've experimented with the salt percentage and not gotten the salt percentage high enough. And you get this like white filmy thing on the top. It's really obvious it didn't work, right? And I don't eat that. I toss it. It's so obvious that something's gone wrong. If you get mold on the top, don't eat it. You need to toss it. If you open it and it smells like rotten fish, don't eat it, okay? Fermented food has a very unique smell. And as you start fermenting, you're going to learn what it smells like. And when you pop the jar, that's what it should smell like. If it smells really funky, don't eat it. But the good news is that it's going to be obvious. You're never going to accidentally hurt your family by making fermented food. As long as it ferments, as long as it goes through that process, it is safe to eat. The only time it's not safe to eat is if it didn't ferment. If something went wrong so it didn't go through that process of growing the good bacteria, because the good bacteria are what keep the food safe and suppress all the bad bacteria. So the only time you're going to be in trouble is if it didn't really ferment or if oxygen got into the jar. And in either case, it will be obvious. So that's the good news. Another question I get is, what's the difference between fermented food and pickled food? And this is really important to understand. So fermented food is food that's grown probiotics with only the addition of salt. When you ferment your food, you are only adding salt and whatever seasonings that you want. You're never adding vinegar, okay? So let me tell you how vinegar came into the whole situation. Vinegar is pickling, right? So when people got rid of fermenting, and we wanted a fast way to reproduce the taste of fermented food, we realized we could do it with vinegar because vinegar is a fermented food. So anything that has had vinegar added to it is pickled. It's not fermented. It's an imitation food. It's an imitation way to create that taste. So when you go to the store today and you buy your pickles, they have been pickled. If you look at the ingredients, it will say vinegar. So they're creating the fermented taste without going through the fermented process. Whereas when you make your pickles at home and you ferment them, all you're adding is salt and you get that same taste. So if you're trying to boost your health, you want fermented food, not pickled food. Another question I get is, how long will it stay good? And my answer to this is, I don't know. I haven't had any go bad. It is amazing that when you get all those good probiotics in there, it just doesn't go bad. I've got fermented food in my basement that's been sitting there for 3 years and it's still fine. But what I can assure you is that the earth has designed food to get us from harvest to harvest. So you're guaranteed it'll be good at least for a year because that's how the earth is designed to work for us. Another question, do my veggies need to be organic? They don't have to be. It is the best if they can be organic because when you're fermenting, what you're relying on is all of those good bacteria that exist on the skin of the vegetable. That is what's growing in the jar. And the reason that cabbage and pickles are our most common fermented foods is because they have the most of those beneficial bacteria. So you want them to have that. If they're not organic, they're going to have less of those good probiotics on them because they've been sprayed with stuff that kills. That's the intent of the sprays, right? But fermenting is still more important. So it's better to ferment something that's not organic than it is to not ferment. So you just use the best produce that you can. And another tip I can give you is If you are trying to make sure that you get a really good ferment, all you have to do is take an existing ferment, take a tablespoon of this liquid out, and put it in as a starter in your next ferment. So you'll see probiotic starters for sale for vegetables online. Just save yourself the money. All you have to do is just take a tablespoon of your own starter and use it to start the next one. And so if you have something that's maybe questionable, you're worried that it doesn't have a lot of probiotics, just use a starter for one of your jars of pickles and you'll be totally fine. So next question, should I wash the produce? Yes and no. You want to wash it because you don't want dirt clods in your ferment, right? But you don't want to be aggressive in how you wash it because you want the skin to be coated with all of that good stuff. So rinse it in the sink, make sure you get any dirt off, but you don't want to peel it and you don't want to really scrub it down because you want to keep that good bacteria on the skin. I had one friend who messaged me, she's like, I made my salsa and it didn't bubble, it never fermented. She peeled all her tomatoes. And so it didn't have the probiotics to get going. So you want to wash them gently. So a lot of produce that you buy in the grocery store has been waxed, especially things like cucumbers, right? They've put the wax on the skin to keep it good in the store longer. And that probably is going to interfere with your fermenting. Really hot water can help with that, but mostly you're going to want to try to get produce that hasn't. I mean, I ferment carrots from Costco, the organic carrots from Costco all the time. And they've been just fine. There's nothing really on the skin that's been a problem. But if you can get local pickling cucumbers from your local farmer's market, that would definitely be preferable to buying them in the store where they have been waxed. So the next question, does it matter what water I use? It does, because guess what kills bacteria? Chlorine. Guess is what's in our tap water? Chlorine. So if we take our tap water and we put it in our ferment, we're going to kill the bacteria that we want to grow. So you want to use some kind of non-chlorinated water. If you have, filtered water in your house, if you have distilled water, any of those that you can use. And if you don't have any other source, you can even take your water and put it in a big pan and just leave it out for 24 hours, and a lot of the chlorine can evaporate from that. But you do want to make sure that you're adding water that doesn't have chlorine. And as a side note to that, think about what's the chlorinated water doing to our guts. If it's going to kill the bacteria on the outside, it's going to kill the good bacteria on the inside. So another thing to think about when you think about what kind of water that you're drinking. Okay, question, how long does it take for this produce to be ready to use when you ferment it? And it varies widely. In general, the smaller the thing that you're fermenting, the faster it's going to ferment. But there are also some of them that go through more stages than others. So let's talk about some different ones and how long they take. Salsa, 2 days is all you're looking at. Carrots, you can ferment them longer, but 2 days, you'll start to see all that bubbling happening. Like I said, in the salsa, you are just watching for a water separation on the bottom, and then you know that you've had the fermentation process start to go in your jar. You just are trying to get some of those things started, and we like to eat those with more of a fresh taste. So anything that you want to have more of a fresh taste, you're going to ferment it for only a couple of days. When you talk about pickles, you've got to have long enough for the fermentation to get all the way through the cucumber, right? So that's usually about 2 to 3 weeks that you're going to let your pickles ferment before you would eat them. The longest one is sauerkraut. And sauerkraut's really tiny, right? So it's not that it takes a long time to ferment, but sauerkraut has been extensively studied, and they have found that there's 3 separate stages of fermentation that sauerkraut goes through, and each one grows different probiotics. So can you eat your sauerkraut after just a week or 2? Absolutely, you could. But the most probiotics happen when you wait 8 to 12 weeks. So sauerkraut is usually one that we let ferment longer before we eat it. And then do you have to store it in the fridge? Only in 2 situations. Only if it is a fruit that you are fermenting and you're trying to prevent the development of alcohol, or you have opened the jar and started to eat out of it. So when I have my vegetables like this, They can just sit in a cool place in my house until I am ready to use them. And that could be 2 weeks, it could be 2 years, right? But as long as you have never broken the seal on this, it will stay oxygen tight and you can just leave it at a cool room temperature. But once you open this jar and you start to eat out of it, then it has to go into the fridge because now you've broken your oxygen tight seal, right? And so now you've got to put it in the fridge. Now, the other hint is that as you eat, right, and you start to eat all of this, you're going to get much more of an oxygen gap. We make sure when we ferment that the jar is filled all the way to the top so that we have as little oxygen as possible, but we're going to undo that as we eat. So you can move this to a smaller jar as you eat so that you're keeping the oxygen down. Another thing people ask is, after this is through fermenting, can I move it to just a regular canning jar so that I can use my phyto jar to ferment something else? And the answer is yes, as long as you move it to the fridge. So if this is done fermenting, I want the jar and I'm ready to eat it, I can take this out, put it in a different glass jar, move it to my fridge, and then use this to ferment something else. You just can't leave it at room temperature once you have broken the seal. Another question is, how do I clean the phyto jar? And one of the things that happens to you as you ferment is you become a germophile instead of a germaphobe, because you realize how many germs are actually good for us, right? How many bacteria are good for us. And so I actually don't sterilize my jars. I just wash them as normally. I wash them with soap and water, and then I reuse them. These phyto jars, the ring on here is actually removable, this metal ring. And so after you've used it, if you want to put it in the dishwasher, you can. Just make sure you remove all the metal pieces, and then you can just pop the glass part in the dishwasher. But otherwise, you can even just leave the metal rings on as it is, wash it in the sink with soap and water, and it's ready to go. So it's actually a really fast process. So now let me share some of my favorite tips for fermenting. The first one's really important, and I learned this the hard way, and that is start slow. If your body is not used to probiotic food, don't go eat a cup of sauerkraut. Okay? When I first started turning my health around 20 years ago, I didn't even know about fermented food yet. I was just taking probiotics, and I cut all of the bad stuff out of my diet and started pouring the probiotics down my system. And I was flat on the couch, sick, like I had deathly flu. Now, the reason for that is my gut was full of the bad bacteria, right? We talk about the fact that most of us in America have our bad-good ratio flipped. And when you start to do this, you start flipping the ratio. But for the ratio to flip, you have to kill the bad stuff. And when it dies, it doesn't make you happy because it releases all its toxins and junk as it dies. So you want to go slow. When you start adding fermented food, just have a teaspoon a day. And that's going to allow the balance in your digestive tract to start to switch slowly. It's not that you're going to do any damage if you go fast, you just won't feel good. Because if that balance starts to shift too fast, you will definitely have die-off symptoms, is what they call that. But if you start slow, it will ease that process and make it a lot less hard on your body. We talked about the tip that if you want, you can take a tablespoon of finished fermented juice to jumpstart your next fermentation, especially if you're doing something that may not have a lot of good probiotics. So like when I'm doing salsa, those tomatoes don't have as many natural probiotics as my cucumbers do. So adding a tablespoon of the fermented juice from some finished cucumbers will help that salsa to ferment really effectively. Okay, another hint. A cookie sheet will be your friend. The reason for this is when you start fermenting in those first 3 days, this gets really active and it is probably going to leak because as this stuff starts bubbling, it's going to start to push those gases out and you are going to get some overflow. So if you want to save yourself some mess cleanup, what I do is when I start fermenting, I just line them all up on a cookie sheet right in my kitchen where I can watch them for the first couple days. and then it's easy to clean up. And then once that intense period is over, then I move them to wherever I'm going to put them, whether that's the basement or the pantry or whatever, and you'll have a lot less mess to clean up. Okay? And then here is my last and favorite tip, and that is salad dressing. This is my recipe for probiotic poppy seed salad dressing. How many of you love that Brianna's poppy seed salad dressing? It's a favorite, but it's full of inflammatory fats and tons of sugar and a lot of things that aren't good for you. But this is a copycat recipe, and the coolest thing is the salad dressing is made with the juice from the ferment. Because let me show you. This is some fermented carrots that my family's been eating, right? So this is out of my fridge. Can you see how much juice there is in there, right? And by the time I get to the bottom, I'm gonna have all of this liquid. This liquid is loaded with probiotics. You do not wanna just toss it, right? And some people love to chug it, but not everybody does. So one of the fun things you can do is use this leftover juice as a basis for salad dressing. And in my fermentation cookbook, there's a whole section on salad dressings so that you can make your own healthy salad dressing. And then you are, once again, you're feeding your whole family probiotics and they never even know it, which is the favorite way to do it because it is amazing how many people have a resistance to fermented food. It's not part of our culture. And so usually when you start giving this to your family, you just start giving it to your family, right? Because sometimes a discussion makes people resistant, but it's easy to start incorporating.